number 16. We're going to continue our study on prophecy. Again, I'm thankful for this study and what the Lord has shown me, and I have certainly learned a lot through it. I hope that you have as well. But just give you some things tonight as we try to finish up chapter 16 and maybe look at the first verse of chapter 17 and kind of by way of introduction start that chapter, but by no means really get into it until next Sunday night, Lord willing, unless He comes back between now and then. But again, it is good to see you here this evening, and thank you for being here. We are down a little bit today. We got several sick and everything. Continue to pray for Chris and Melissa and everything. Talked to them earlier, and they went to get tested and everything. Pray that everything comes back okay. Chris said he feels okay, but Melissa feels pretty bad, and they said she's not felt too well at all this week. So just pray for her. Pray that they'll feel better real soon. And several others, and of course continue to remember Mildred and Robert not doing well there. So remember Robert in prayer. He wishes he could be here, and I miss seeing him here. But pray for them, and then continue to remember Mary and Donald and stuff. It's good to see Donald back this morning with us. Remember Mike and Sherry Trail. I know Sherry's not been feeling well, so remember her. And just several different people sick, hurting, different things, and just pray for them. Lord knows the need. He knows what they need, what's best for each and every one. And of course, there's lots of names on our prayer list, and I'm thankful God knows who they are, and even those unspoken we talk about all the time. He knows exactly who they are and what it is. And so continue to pray. Remember to continue praying every day. Now, remember, we're doing at least 7 hours a day of prayer from 12 p.m. at lunchtime through 7 p.m. each evening. And we got somebody in the church praying, and that's encouraging. And then we got some praying throughout the day just whenever the Lord lays it on their heart. But at least 7 hours a day we got people praying, and that's wonderful. And again, if you want to be added to that list or need a different time, just let me know and we'll make the changes. But we're praying for this upcoming election. We're praying for our nation as a whole, our leaders, our churches. We're praying for the lost. Just a lot to pray about, a lot to pray for right now. And it's a chaotic year, a chaotic time, but I'm thankful that God is not the author of confusion, and He's in control of all of it, even when we watch the news and we see how out of control everything else is. He's still in control, and I'm thankful for that. Just a few announcements real quick, just to go over before we get into it stuff. Do remember, next Sunday night, we'll continue our study on prophecy, but also we'll have a business meeting next Sunday night. We're going to try to get back on track with those. COVID kind of messed all that up with the quarters and things like that, but Tereva's got all the financials together. So next Sunday night, we'll do our business meeting and discuss that. Anything else that needs to be discussed be next Sunday night. And then also October the 24th, we'll be having a fall festival here at the church. I hope that each and every one of you can be here with us for that day, and also bring somebody with you. And we're looking forward to a great time that day, October the 24th on a Saturday from 3 until probably about 6. And we're going to try to do a hayride if we can. We're going to grill out some hot dogs and some fixings and desserts people can bring if they like. And just looking for a great day of fun and fellowship, not just as a church family, but as an entire community. This is open to everybody, whether you go to church here or not. We want everybody to come. Everybody's welcome. This week I'll work on some flyers. I'll post it on Facebook, our Facebook page, so you can share that there. And then by next Sunday, we'll try to have some actual flyers in here if you want to hang those out or hand them to somebody or stick them in a mailbox, whatever. But remember the upcoming Fall Festival, and Stephen, matter of fact, messaged me earlier today, and they found some small pumpkins, and they were going to get 25 of those wherever they found those, and I told them I appreciated that. So we're going to let the kids paint some pumpkins, decorate them, take them home with them, stuff like that. And I think it'd be good if everybody can bring in maybe some little treat bags and candy and stuff to give the kids, because like I said this morning, there are some areas, I don't know who all to be, but there are some neighborhoods and some communities that are not advertising Halloween this year, not encouraging trick-or-treating because of COVID. and I don't want the kids to miss out on some candy and stuff like that. So we want to make it a fun day for kids and adults alike. But if you have any ideas at all for that evening, just let me know, and we'll try to make it happen. And again, if you know somebody that can help us with a hayride or something, we'll try to get that together as well. I think it'd be neat to do some of the old-timey things that, honestly, a lot of the kids nowadays don't know what they are and stuff. So be in prayer about that. And then also, I talked to a good friend of mine today, Jim Phelps. I went to church with him for many years, and he's actually going to be with us on October the 25th. Going to come in and do a little bit of singing for us that morning. He's going to come and do some special singing, and I told him the service is his to do whatever, and if time allows and the Lord sees fit, I'll bring a message that morning as well, like normal, but for him just not be hindered by any means, and just every how many songs he wants to bring and sing, he's going to do that. So that'll be October the 25th, our morning service at 11 a.m. Jim Phelps will be with us singing that morning. So be here for that, be inviting somebody. And then also I've talked to a couple other people about trying to get them in here before the end of the year to have some special services and things like that. And pray about Lord's will to be done with all of that stuff upcoming. But I think I covered everything on that. If I didn't, just holler at me and say, hey, you forgot this, or whatever. But I believe that's basically all the announcements to mention. Like I said, we'll put stuff out there on our Facebook page for people to read and see. But if you found your place in Revelation chapter number 16, if my memory serves me correctly, we finished up with verse number 11 and kind of just introduced verse number 12. We may have talked about it a little bit. I'm not sure how much detail we actually got into on that. But I do have some notes here I want to go over with you, because verse number 12 is very, very important in context. And of course, we know in chapter number 16, we're kind of out of the parentheses now. And we saw the 7 angels with the 7 vials pour out the vials upon the whole earth. We know that they had a predetermined location they went to. They poured those out. We saw verse 2, 3, and 4. We saw 1, 2, and 3 vials poured out, one right after the other. Verse number 8, we saw the 4th vial. Verse number 10, we saw the 5th vial poured out. And we saw the destruction it brought, the chaos that it brought, the pain, the suffering, the anguish that it brought, all that. And that brings us to verse number 12. Tonight we're going to try to finish chapter 16 with the help of the Lord and look at a few things. But it says in verse number 12, and it says, and the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates. And the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Now, the Euphrates River, we see that it calls it the Great River Euphrates. It's called the Great River at least 5 times in Scripture. It flows some 1,800 miles from its source on the slopes of Mount Ararat to the Persian Gulf. It forms the eastern boundary of the land that God promised to Israel. God will dry it up to make way for the Eastern Confederacy to reach Israel. You got to remember, it says the kings of the east. So when you study this out and look at it, you can go back to a lot of Old Testament verses and things like that to kind of tie in some of the loose ends here. We're not going to go to all of them, but if you go to Daniel, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Joel, and then again here in Revelation, we see that the kings of the east are coming into Israel to basically gang up on Israel. They are wanting to finally come in and in their minds destroy Israel and God. That's their whole mindset. That's their whole philosophy. The kings of the east are going to gang up on Israel. They're going to come in. You got to remember back in Revelation chapter 9, we talked about how the 200 million man army demonically possessed, and how many writers and scholars believe that to be a Chinese army. If you look just east of Israel and stuff, you have countries like China, you have Russia, you have all those people that hate Israel and hate what they stand for. They hate the God of the Bible. And the Euphrates River, some miraculous way, God is going to dry that thing up and basically allow them to be able to cross over all of that into Israel. And come into Israel. Now, of course, we know what Isaiah told us about that. Isaiah says that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. We know that Isaiah penned that down for the nation of Israel, that there will be no weapon to prosper against the nation of Israel. And that still holds true today. That's why today, Israel, they have the best military in the world. They have the best technology in the world. People can fire a rocket at them, and guess what? It's going to blow up in the sky before it ever gets to them, because they have a dome, a shield of protection over them. It's amazing when you look at some of just the military side of things over there in that country. But we see that the great river Euphrates is dried up. And when you think of that, remember some of the things that happened before this vial. We saw how all the water turned to what? Blood. We see that all the water turned to blood. All of your drinking water, everything, none of that is pure and clean anymore. It's all blood. And not only that, we saw that how the one vial was poured upon the sun. Remember that? And we talked about how that sun, the scorching heat, not sure how all that looks, how that's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And when that happens and you have all that heat, if I could say it this way, polarized caps will melt. And we talked about how when they melt, that scientists believe that would raise the ocean levels by 200 feet. And also when that happens, you're going to have Mount Ararat and all that, the snow that's on those mountains and stuff, it's all going to melt. It's all going to come down into the Euphrates. It's probably going to create like a swamp or a marsh or something. But some miraculous way, God is going to dry all that area up to pave a way for those kings of the east to move in on Israel. And like I said, what's amazing to think about it is God is allowing this to happen. God is orchestrating this to happen. And like I said, the kings of the east, when you go back to Revelation chapter number 9, you look at what we call the Chinese army of 200 million men, demonically possessed. You know, the devil's thinking, all right, I've got him right where I want him. I'm going to be able to go in there. I'm going to be able to take over Israel. I'm going to be able to destroy Israel, destroy God. All these different kings of the earth, kings of the east is going to think that. And God is really just prophetically moving the chess pieces around, and He's still in control of every bit of it. It's an amazing picture to see how all this is coming about. But it says that the kings of the east might be prepared. It says, and I saw, verse number 13, and this is John saying, I saw this. He says, and I saw 3 unclean spirits. And anytime you see the word unclean spirits, that's a New Testament word for demon. Okay, it's like demonically possessed or oppressed is what that means, is demonic activity. You remember the maniac of Gadara and stuff. He had an unclean spirit, and other people in the New Testament had unclean spirits, and Jesus performed miracles and things like that and cast them out. But it says, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. Right there is the 3, isn't it? The big 3, the unholy trinity, we call it. We see them all called out right there in verse number 13, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. The dragon being who? Satan. We see the beast being who? The Antichrist. And then you see here the false prophet, and basically he's the head over the one world religion. He's making sure that everybody's worshiping the Antichrist. You have the 3, and those are the 3, the unholy trinity. And it says out of each of them, out of their mouths came frogs. It says unclean spirits. That shows you the demonic activity happening here. And it says frogs, and you look at frogs in the Bible, and frogs in the Bible never have a good meaning behind them. You look back with Egypt. Frogs were a sign of major judgment. Major judgment is associated with frogs. Matter of fact, even in Leviticus, and of course we don't live under the law anymore, but Leviticus tells people not to eat of frogs and stuff. Some of you frog leg loving people saying, thank God I'm not under the law anymore, right? But anyway, that's not for me. I don't eat those things, those slimy things. But anyway, frogs is a way of major judgment. Okay, it means major judgment. So we see that these 3, the dragon, the beast, the false prophet, all this stuff is demonic activity. It talks about the 3 unclean spirits, demonically oppressed or possessed, however you want to look at that. And it says, verse number 14, for they are the spirits of what? Devils. Working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Now, there's a lot in that verse there. First of all, we saw in the previous verse, verse number 13, the unclean spirits. And verse 14 tells us they're working spirit, for they are the spirits of devils working miracles. They're working miracles. Say, well, what does that mean? Well, even Satan can perform miracles. Remember, Satan has power. A lot of times we underestimate the power that he has, or the knowledge that he has, or the things that he can do. Now, do remember that there is a devil, but like Spurgeon said, he's a devil that's on God's leash, and when God wants him to bark, he'll have him bark. When he don't, he won't. And Satan only has as much power as God allows him to have. But it says here that they're working miracles. They're working miracles. They're doing things to fool people. They're doing things to get people to say, hey, maybe there's something to this. We do need to be worshiping this guy. Remember what we talked about, how the Antichrist and stuff, it talked about how he died and then resurrected again. Remember that miracle, quote-unquote miracle that happened? I don't believe him to really die there. I believe that's all a plot, a magic trick, I guess you could say. But no doubt, we see that the devil can work miracles. He can make crazy things happen. He can make crazy things happen. I mean, look what's happening in the world today. The Bible plainly tells us that he's the prince and power of the air. He's the ruler of the dark. He's the ruler of this world. So you look at the things that's happening and stuff, he has lots of power. Don't underestimate how much power the devil has. He has a lot of it. But again, he only has as much as God allows him to have. Now, I do believe in the last days, I do believe in the times which we live and stuff like that. I feel like probably God is taking his hand off little by little, and he's giving more and more power. Why? Because we're seeing, I believe, the great falling away right now. And people are basically falling by the wayside and believing whatever comes their way, living however they want to live, thinking that there's more than one way to heaven. All kind of craziness going on. But it says that these unclean spirits, these spirits of the devils, they are working miracles. They're doing things that we would not anticipate them doing. But they are working miracles. It says, which go forth into the kings of the earth and of the whole world. So what does that mean? So basically, the whole world is under this spell, if I could say it that way, of the Antichrist. And it's all demonically supercharged. And they're basically doing whatever the devil tells them to do, not knowing the whole time that God is using the devil to put everybody right where he wants them, when he wants them. Does that make sense? So there's a lot going on here, but it says that they're working miracles which go forth into the kings of the earth and of the whole world. And notice the last part of this, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Now there's a lot right there. First of all, notice the word Almighty. That's a key word in verse number 14. Why is that a key word? Well, it shows up several times in the book of Revelation. It shows up in Revelation chapter 1 verse 8, chapter 4 verse 8, chapter 11 verse 17, chapter 15 verse 3. Chapter 16, verses 7 and 14. Shows up later in chapter 19, verse 15. And again in chapter 21, verse 22. Multiple times you see this word Almighty shown up throughout the book of Revelation. Literally what that word means, the way it is written in context, is Almighty here literally means one who has power over everything. One who has power over everything. Not some things, not part of the things, but everything. Aren't you glad we serve a God that has power over everything? I don't know about you, but that should excite us a little bit and should comfort us a little bit. Hey, no matter what happens, he still has power over everything. That's literally what that one word right there, Almighty, that's the idea that it carries, what it literally means. one who has power over everything. And in other words, the one that is in total control. He's in total control. Like I said, we don't serve a God that's in heaven right now, pacing back and forth, twiddling his thumbs, thinking, what am I going to do now? I didn't see that happening. I can't believe they pulled that stunt. I can't believe this happened, that happened. I can't believe Joe said that. Can't believe Nancy did this. Well, we're surprised every day when we turn the news on. He's not surprised. Why? He's in total control. He knows everything going on. He is in total control. God commands all the host of powers in heaven and earth, and he is able to overcome all his foes, all of his enemies. The title Almighty occurs often in Revelation as this book unveils God's awesome control over the universe and throughout all history. From the very beginning to the very end, he's in total control. Remember, he's Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, but he's everything in between as well. It's unbelievable to try to comprehend all that, but he's in total control. So we see that he's allowing the devil to possess and oppress and move the chess pieces around and the kings of the east to come against Israel and cross over the Euphrates and all these people come against him and the nation Israel. He's allowing the devil to do all that stuff, but at the end of the day, he's still in control of all of it. Just when the devil thinks he's moved that chess piece in the right place, God's like, checkmate. I mean, he's always one step ahead, but he's using him for his divine plan. I hope that makes sense. It gets very deep, and we could spend a lot of time here. But he says in verse number 15, behold. In other words, pay attention. Grab what I'm about to tell you. He says, behold. He says, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame. So what does that verse say? And it's basically talking about his second coming from heaven. Not talking about the rapture here. This isn't talking about the church being raptured out. This is talking about the Lord of Lords, King of Kings, God Almighty, coming from heaven to battle the devil. That's what this is talking about. His second coming from heaven. He's telling us basically to pay attention. He said, don't be caught off guard. You need to be paying attention here. Pay attention to what's happened. Make sure that you're ready. Again, this is not the rapture we're talking about, but we're talking about his coming again. And remember, when he comes again, he's not coming as a baby in a manger. He's coming as King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He's coming as who he really is. And people are going to see that. But that's basically, in a nutshell, what that verse is kind of telling us there. And we get to verse number 16. And it says, and he gathered them together. Who gathered them together? God did, right? We're talking about God doing this. He says, and he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Armageddon. How many's heard that word before? Everybody in here. If you want to know New York Times bestseller, write a book and title it Armageddon. Why? Everybody's interested in it. Everybody wants to know when's the end of the world. The Battle of Armageddon. The apocalypse. What's going to happen? Listen, people are fascinated by that stuff. People are looking for Armageddon. They're wanting to know who the Antichrist is, all that stuff. Listen, as us as Christians, we need to be looking more for Jesus Christ than we do the Antichrist. But listen, no doubt the Antichrist is out there. God knows who that is. They'll reveal himself in an appointed time. It's going to happen. But listen, I'm glad I'm not going to be around to see that mess. I'm going to be out of here. But people are just fascinated by the word itself, Armageddon. And I've done a little bit of research today on the word itself, Armageddon, found here in chapter 16, verse number 16. Matter of fact, one interesting fact about Armageddon or the area that it's located, it's Hebrew for the hill of Megiddo is what it's. If you look at a map, you don't see Armageddon. You see Megiddo, and it is actually 60 miles north of Israel or of Jerusalem. It's 60 miles north of Jerusalem is where it's at. And Napoleon the Great, one of the greatest warriors of all time and stuff, one of the most military strategic minded people that you ever read about studying history. He said at one time, and of course, as far as we know, Napoleon was not a Christian, biblically inclined, or knew anything about prophecy or the book of Revelation or anything like that. But when he saw that valley, the Jezreel Valley or Megiddo in that area, he said this is the greatest battlefield that the earth has ever produced. That was a quote from Napoleon. It's been pinned down, written, historic fact that Napoleon said that's the greatest battlefield he could ever lay his eyes on. I mean, when he saw that valley, he saw the layout, saw what it looked like. He said it's the greatest battlefield that the earth has ever produced. I mean, think about that for a minute. Remember who created everything? God did. I think back to creation and stuff, and when He created everything, and then you think of when He destroyed the earth the first time with the flood, Noah's flood, and how that changed the landscape dramatically. But underneath all that water, He's carving out this valley and this area called Megiddo, the Jezreel Valley. And He's carving that out under that water and stuff. And when the water is gone, we see that as an area where the Battle of Armageddon will take place. Listen, He's in total control. He's in complete control of what's to happen. Armageddon, again, it's Hebrew for the hill of Megiddo. Megiddo means a place of slaughter. That's what that word means in Hebrew, is place of slaughter. We know it's going to be a place like there's never been any slaughter ever taken place before. Remember, just a chapter or so back, it talked about the wine press, and it talked about the blood being to the horses' bridles, and 4 to 4.5 feet of blood, and how long and of an area that covers, and how deep that is, and how much bloodshed is going to take place. No wonder it's called that. It's going to be a place of slaughter. It is the plain and the holy land where Barak defeated the Canaanites in Judges chapter 5. And Gideon defeated the Mennonites in Judges chapter 7. King Saul fought his last battle there in 1 Samuel chapter 31. So there's battles and things that have taken place there before, biblically speaking, in Old Testament. But none of that's going to hold a light. None of that's going to hold a candle to what's coming, to what's about to happen. One of the greatest natural battlefields in the world. It's where the Antichrist will gather the world's armies to fight against Jesus Christ. We see that talked about over in Isaiah chapter 24. We see it talked about in Joel chapter 3. Zechariah chapters 12, 13, and 14. You can read more about that in those verses. And if you didn't get all that written down, just see me and I'll give you the notes and stuff after service. But Isaiah chapter 24, Joel chapter 3, Zechariah chapter 12, 13, and 14. You can read more about that, of where all the world's armies come together to basically battle Jesus Christ. We see that Revelation chapter 19, and we're going to get there eventually. Revelation chapter 19, specifically verses 11 through 21, records the outcome. And we're getting there. We're not there yet, but it records the outcome, what's to happen, what's going to come about with that battle of Armageddon. But we see that it's the perfect battlefield, as Napoleon called it. We see in verse number 17, we see the seventh and final vial poured out. It says, and the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air. And there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne. Remember when we first started this study in Revelation, I talked about you're going to see the word throne many times throughout this book. Here we see it again. And out of the temple, out of heaven, from the throne, saying, it is done. So in other words, whose voice is that? It's God's voice. It says a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne. It can only be one voice, only one person. It's God's voice. And what does it say? It is done. It is done. What's done? It's done that all of the pieces of the puzzle are put together for the Battle of Armageddon to take place. It's done that the kings of the east and all these armies of the world and stuff have came against me, came against Israel, and they're all right stationed exactly right where I want them to be. Remember, he's in control of every bit of this. And it's amazing to me how he says there, it is done. He says, it is done. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of when he's hanging on the cross, and he says, it is finished. When he said, it is finished, you can't add to that. You can't take away from that. It's plus nothing, minus nothing. He says, it is finished. That's it. It's done. Same thing here when he says, it is done. Guess what? We can't add to that. We can't take away from that. We can't move any of the pieces of the puzzle around about that. It is done. He said, listen, all the pieces are right where I want them to be. All this has came, and listen, it's no guessing game. It's no hope so, maybe so. He's in divine control of every bit of this happening. And he says, it is done. He says, it is done. We see that it's God's voice. In other words, the table is set. The table is set. We're ready to eat. That's basically what he's saying here. He said, it's done. We get to verse number 18, and he says, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not seen since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake and so great. Now, several things there. First of all, we see that after this seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and we see that God saying it is done, we see that there's voices and thunders and lightning. Now, haven't we read that before? We've seen a lot of thunder and lightning and voices, haven't we? Remember, we talked in detail about lightning and thunder and how that gets our attention. You know, if we're in our house and stuff and a thunderstorm comes up in the summertime and it comes a loud crack of thunder and lightning outside, guess what? It startles you. It gets your attention. It scares you. You start paying attention. You start turning the news on and saying, well, good Lord, we're going to have a tornado? I mean, it gets your attention. Guess what? This is getting your attention. We see this happen before, and many times in the book of Revelation, we've already read this same kind of terminology, exactly word for word, where there's voices, thunderings, and lightnings. But then it goes on to say, and there was a great earthquake. Now, haven't we seen that several times before, too? With some of the seven seals and the seven trumpets, were there not numerous earthquakes that took place way back then? I mean, think about it for a minute. The earth has been shaken at its core. I mean, there have been massive earthquakes already take place. And we see here that it says there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth. In other words, this earthquake that happens here in this verse at this appointed time, this earthquake is the worst earthquake that has ever taken place. Those other earthquakes that happen with the other seals and the trumpets and all the different things that taken place, they don't hold a light to what this thing does. They don't hold a light to it, because the Bible tells us that such as it was not since men were upon the earth. Nobody has ever been here when this type of earthquake has happened. Now that's some serious shaking. I couldn't imagine that. I know just a little bit of a shaking woke me up there a few months ago and stuff out of the bed, and I was like, what in the world? You know, it's an eerie feeling. And that was nothing compared to what other people felt, you know, in different parts of the world and throughout history and stuff like that. But this earthquake is going to be far worse than anything this world has ever seen. It says it's a great earthquake, unlike anything anybody's ever seen. And look in verse number 19. It says, and the great city. What's that great city? Jerusalem. We've talked about that great city. Anytime you see that great city, it's talking about Jerusalem. It says, and the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Notice Jerusalem, the great city, will be split into three parts. I found that interesting. It'll be split into three parts, but it won't be split into three parts as a judgment. It'll be split into 3 parts as an improvement. Say, well, what do you mean? Say, well, you got to remember, all this is setting the stage for the millennial reign. When the millennial reign happens, guess what? The world's going to go back to the way it was in the Garden of Eden, when everything was perfect. When everything was exactly the way it should have been. There was no sin, there was no thorn, there was no thistle, no venom, no poison, no nothing. It was perfect. How God ordained it from the very beginning. The millennial reign, the millennial kingdom, it's going to go back to that perfection. So all this stuff that God's doing, all the destroying that's taking place, all the earthquakes that's taking place, all this stuff, guess what? He's basically going in and doing a remodel. He's tearing down the walls. He's fixing up the house. He's getting it ready for the millennial reign. Jerusalem, the great city, will be split into 3 parts, not as a judgment, but as an improvement. As an improvement. What happens many times when you remodel a house? You go in, you tear some walls down, don't you? You bust up some steps or something. Dora, she likes watching HGTV, and when they turn all these houses, Chip and Joanna ain't got nothing on what's going to happen right here. But they go in and you do some destroying before you make it all pretty, don't you? Sometimes I tell Dora, in order to clean up a mess, you got to make a mess. That's true. We clean out a closet, good Lord, it looks like something blew up in the house. But by the time we're done, hey, it looks better than it ever did. That's what happens. Say, well, what are you talking about? Well, I tell you what, we normally don't get out of Revelation a little bit, but I want you to see this. Go over to the book of Zechariah. Go to Zechariah chapter number 14. Zechariah chapter number 14. This is what kind of brings all this together. You can actually take this and study it much further than what we're going to talk about tonight. We're just basically, I just want to read it into your hearing and you to see where some of this comes from, and you can, like I said, take it further in your personal study. And eventually, one of these days, we are going to get into the book of Zechariah, Ezekiel, and Daniel and talk much more about this stuff, because there's a lot in those Old Testament books that has to do with the end-time prophecy as well. It's not all just in the book of Revelation. But in Zechariah chapter number 14, look what it says, starting in verse number 1. It says, behold, and everybody see that word behold again. That means pay attention. That's a good word. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against who? Jerusalem, that great city, to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the woman ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark. But it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night. But it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. And it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, and half of them toward the hinder sea. In summer and in winter shall it be. Now say, well, that sounds confusing to me. Well, we're going to talk about that in greater detail later on down the road. But basically what that's saying there, that is setting the foundation for the millennial reign. That's setting up the foundation for the new Jerusalem to come down. I've told you before that area, many commentaries I've read and other scholars I've read after different things, that area, when you look at it from a geographical area and stuff, the area that's going to be kind of flattened out there due to the earthquake and stuff is going to be 1,200 miles by 1,200 miles. Well, how big is New Jerusalem? 1,200 miles by 1,200 miles. It's basically what God is doing here. He's creating a landing pad. for New Jerusalem to come down and land. That's basically what's happening here. I mean, it's just an amazing sight to think about and stuff and what's going to happen. But Jerusalem will be split into three parts. But like I said, not as judgment, but as an improvement. Remember, God's going to take everything back to the way it originally was, with no sin. It's going to go back to a perfect world. Remember what I told you, the book of Romans tells us, it says that even the earth groans for his coming. Why? Because the earth, the soil, the dirt, the trees, everything out there, it knows what perfection is like. It knows what it was once like for a perfect world to be here. And we're far from it today. But it groans for that. We see some of the improvements that take place according to Zechariah chapter 14, verse 8. We see additional water supply. In Zechariah chapter 14, verses 4 and 5, we see topographical changes. It will prepare the city for its central place in the millennial kingdom. Remember, Jerusalem is the only city to be spared the judgment and will be made more beautiful because of her repentance. We see that. It says the great city was divided into three parts. But look what happens. It's, after it talks about the great city, it says, "And the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." Remember Babylon, we talked a lot about that. When we see Babylon called out here, please remember that we're not talking about a certain country or a certain nation. Remember, Babylon is talking about a system. That system being a one-world government, a one-world currency, a one-world religion. That's what Babylon is referring to here. It's all the one-world stuff. That's what it's referring to. So Babylon, the great Babylon, that's what it's talking about here. But we see a major quake, major shaking. And notice it doesn't stop there. It says in verse 20, it lets us know that every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. All of the islands gone. All of the mountains flat. Now that takes a pretty powerful earthquake to do something like that. Think about it for a minute. Flat mountains. These mountains, these hills we see around us, they won't be there no more. It will flatten everything out. Hawaii, the Caribbean, Bahamas, those beautiful islands, gone. Because what does it say? It says every island. No, and listen, if the Bible says every, that means every. I mean, I take that literal. If God's word says it, I believe it. He says every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. That changes the landscape dramatically, don't it? But remember, he's doing all this to set up the millennial kingdom. He's preparing a way. He's preparing that landing pad for New Jerusalem. It's coming. It says every island fled away and the mountains were not found. So if you want to go visit an island, you better do it soon. I think time's drawing near. But that takes major shaking, a major quake to do that. And notice this, verse number 21. We're almost done tonight. Verse number 21. We've almost made it through the chapter here. Verse 21 says, "And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent." When you look that up, I've looked at different references, different books, different commentaries, different things, and of course, weights and measurements in Bible times and stuff, people vary with that a little bit today based on what we have. But a talent is anywhere from 75 pounds to 100 pounds. Some commentators say it's 100 pounds. Some commentators say it's 75. Either way, you take 75 pounds or 100 pounds falling out of the air, it's both going to do a lot of damage. That 25 pound difference ain't going to make a whole lot of difference. It ain't going to make a hill beans difference out there when that stuff starts hitting things. But a talent in Bible times and stuff, basically they talk about how much a man could carry by himself. That's kind of how they got a talent. It was the maximum weight that a man could carry. And it ranges from 75 pounds to 100 pounds. Now remember what it said though. It said every stone about the weight of a talent. That means, I'm sure everybody in here has been in a hailstorm. I'm telling you, they're horrible. They'll do more damage than anything. And they're loud. And they happen fast. I mean, they will bust out your windows. They'll make dents in your car. I mean, they'll do all kinds of stuff. Could you imagine? And around here, I mean, we don't have large hail. I mean, the biggest size I've ever seen in this area is probably quarter size, I guess, in this area. But can you imagine one weighing 75 pounds or 100 pounds? Think of the name. I mean, that would crush a car. So we see here that after this earthquake happened, it says there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent, 75 to 100 pounds. And men, what? Blasphemed God. They blasphemed God because why? Because of the plague of the hail. For the plague thereof was exceeding great. Can you imagine the death toll that's going to take place just from the hailstorm? I mean, it don't matter if you're in your house or not. That's going to come through the roof. That's going to come through the roof of the house. I mean, that's coming from way up in the sky, atmospheric conditions happening. That's falling a long way down at a high rate of speed, very heavy, very fast. It's going to do a lot of damage. And it says that every stone was that weight. Not just one or two of them. Not just sporadic. It says every stone. Say, well, how big of a hailstorm is going to be? I don't know. I don't want to know. I ain't going to be here to know. I ain't going to be here to find out. It just says that every stone is going to be about the weight of a town. That's going to cause catastrophic damage. A lot of death happening very quickly. I mean, it hurts if you get hit in the head with a little pea-sized head. Could you imagine that? Be like the Wile E. Coyote cartoons. I mean, flatten you out. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what that would be like. I mean, it would be horrible. And I'm thankful for the ones that are saved. We don't have to worry about that mess. But listen, we need to be telling somebody about Jesus and say, hey, you don't want to go through this. Because I guarantee you, you say, did you build a house that could withstand 100-pound hail balls? That'd be, what are you talking about? Be like, well, it's coming. Listen, we need to be telling people about Jesus. We need to be telling people, hey, you don't have to go through this. You don't have to go through it. You read that in verse 21 there, after it talks about the hail, it says, men blasphemed God. They cursed God because of the plague of the hail. They knew that the judgment, they knew that the hail is coming from God. They know that. They know where it's coming from. But they're doing what? They're cursing God because of it. That's sad. It's scary. Kind of like our world today about things, isn't it? Remember, God's still in control of everything today, just like He was way back then, just like He's going to be in the future with all this stuff. And people are out there cursing God and blaspheming God. Listen, that tells me that man without God is capable of anything. We live in a scary society. We live in a type of society where we're seeing so much evil take place. We see that, man without God really is capable of about anything. We see that happening. We've made it through chapter 16. I want to leave you with this. We're going to look at one verse of Scripture in chapter 17. And before we get to chapter 17, let me give you just a little bit of an outline of what's happening here now. Chapters 17 and 18 are kind of like a parentheses again. Okay, we're diving back into a parentheses. We're not following right in line with chronological events. We're taking a break from that again. Chapters 17 and 18 really focus on one aspect of the bowl or the vial of judgments, and that's the judgment of Babylon. Chapters 17 and 18 is focusing on Babylon. Now remember, when I say Babylon, I'm not talking about an actual country. I know that's hard to kind of wrap our minds around a lot of times because, yes, there was a Babylon at one point. We believe it to be where present-day Iraq and Iran and that area and stuff is. There was an actual Babylon, and all that stuff does go back to... That's why Babylon is always associated with evil and bad, is because you go back to Genesis chapter 10, chapter 11, and you see them building the Tower of Babel. That's where all that came from. Actually, God scattered everybody because of that mess. They wanted one world government, one world religion, one world currency. Guess what the Antichrist wants? Every bit of that. That's why Babylon, Babel, all that stuff's tied together. But when you get to chapter 17, chapter 18, It is basically focusing on one of the vials, and that's the judgment of Babylon. Okay? Verse number 1, chapter 17. It says, "And there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me." Talked with who? Talked with John, didn't they? John's pinning this down. Could you imagine that? What you just witnessed, what you just saw, one of those 7 angels pouring out that vial, coming and talking to you. It says, "Come and talk with me, saying unto me, Come hither. I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters." So that's pretty stout language. Yeah, it is. God said it, I didn't. God said, He said, "I'll show you the judgment of the great whore." Who's the great whore? It's Babylon. It's the Antichrist kingdom. It's the systematic world of one world religion, one world government, one world currency. Listen, we're seeing all this stuff shape up right before our very eyes right now. We see what's happening with the United Nations, with the European Union. We see in peace treaties signed with different countries and different things happening. We're being told that there's a coin shortage. Why? They want to collect all those coins up so they can say, hey, we're going to go to one currency. They're wanting the digital chip, the credit cards, the plastic. They're wanting that to pay. I couldn't tell you how many places in Pigeon Forge we went to. They did not accept forms of payment with money and change. They wanted card, didn't they? They would have signs up, card. And then some places would say, due to national coin shortage, we want exact change. And one lady got mad at me because I didn't have a penny. I was like, goodness gracious, man. You know, 1 penny. I mean, you wasn't with me on that one, but yeah, it was weird. And I was trying to pay out, and I gave her a dime. It was like 9 cents or whatever. And I gave her a dime, and she didn't like that. I was like, Lord have mercy. But we're seeing all this stuff happen. We're seeing the stuff transition to a one world government, a one world religion. We're seeing that stuff happen with Catholicism and Islam. People get mad about that. They don't like that. But we're going to see later in chapter number 17, when it talks about the 7 heads or 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, that's talking about Rome. What's so popular in Rome? Catholicism. The Pope. All that stuff happening and stuff. We're going to see how all that comes to play. But we're seeing all the stuff kind of fall right in place right now. He says, that angel telling John here, it says, come hither, I'll show you the judgment of the great whore. Or in other words, Babylon, that great city, great Babylon. We've seen it called all those different things. In other words, it's the Antichrist and his kingdom. That systematic way of life. And he says, that sitteth upon many waters. Now, don't get too confused on the word many waters. That doesn't mean actual water like we think of rivers and streams and things like that. That is actually talking about nations. A lot of times when the Bible talks about waters or many waters, it's referring to nations. So basically it's talking about you have Babylon, you have the systematic way of the Antichrist, and it says that sitteth upon many nations. Remember, many nations, many governments are going to hand over power to the Antichrist. They're going to fall right under that. The Antichrist, honestly, it's kind of like how we see stuff with the European Union, United Nations, all that stuff today. All these people grouped up around the table singing Kumbaya and all that. I mean, that's what it's going to be like. But he says that, he calls it here, John pinned down, the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. In other words, many nations. All these other nations that fell into this systematic way of the Antichrist, the one world government, one world religion, one world currency. It says in verse number 2, with whom the kings of the earth, that's talking about your nations, your different rulers, kings, presidents, whatever, have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Now, when it says fornication there, that's not talking about the way we think fornication. That's talking about the perverted way the one world government, one world religion, one world currency. And basically you have all these different nations and the nation's rulers basically falling right into it. And they're saying, oh, we want to be a part of that. Oh, the Antichrist is promising us how many millions of dollars if we join? Oh, yeah, we'll do that. We'll take that money. And when it's talking about being drunken, it's not talking about physically drinking alcohol here. And of course, I'm sure there will be in that day, and it'll be worse than it's ever been. But that is talking about how they are just going to be so glazed over with all this stuff. They're just going to follow whichever way the Antichrist says to fall. They're going to be under a spell, basically, if I could say it that way, of demonic oppression and possession and stuff like that. It all feeds right into the Antichrist. That's what chapter 17. Chapter 17, it's really called the Great Mystery. Many Bibles outline it as the Great Mystery, but it'll take us a whole Sunday night to go through chapter 17, and then probably another whole Sunday night to go through chapter 18. And Lord willing, we'll pick back up that next week. But remember, chapters 17 and 18 is a parenthesis of what's happening now. And what it does is it gives us further detail, more detail on the judgment of Babylon. Okay, that's basically the whole gist of chapters 17 and 18. But by going through these two chapters, we're going to learn a lot about Babylon. We're going to learn a lot about the system. We're going to learn a lot about their thinking and the way of life and the things that they did and stuff like that. And then also we're going to look at other countries that are involved with this mess. And we'll get all that next week, Lord willing. But we'll end there tonight. We made it through chapter 16. We've introduced 17 tonight. I know it's a lot of information. I'm telling you, sometimes, I studied all day today, and it's just like, drinking from a fire hose sometimes. It's like you're getting so much info and wanting to write so much down and things. I hope and pray that you got something out of it tonight. I hope I didn't confuse anybody. If I did, just ask me. I'll try to clarify. Or if you say, hey, I didn't get that Bible verse, I'll give you that verse out of my notes. There's nothing special about my notes. I'll share them with anybody. But any questions or comments about anything tonight before we dismiss?